rivalries are some of the most important things within any sport, and so obviously that translates to esports quite well. And it's really entertaining, right? We have that from even TV shows or movies that everyone loves a good rivalry. And I think it's important because it also pushes people, the competitors, to get better. So I think just in general, the match would be a lot less if the win was just another win, right? It was just another mark on the scoreboard to say, okay, you guys are maybe going to playoffs, or, you win the championship, whatever. It's the storyline behind it that is equally as important. And this is to get people more involved in that they care about these players and they care about the actual plot lines that are going through as history kind of unravels itself. And it also lets the fans know that this match is more important than a typical match. You obviously had the CLG versus TSM matches back in the day being very hype and bringing a lot of buzz on who won that, or how well a certain player did. And as you can see, when a rivalry is created as such, it becomes more important for the players as well too. They want to win because they feel as though they need to win in order to kind of progress the plot line and make themselves look better in the entire limelight of both the audience and also just their personal selves, right? They feel as though they have an investment within a rivalry too. Now, obviously, CLG versus TSM is mostly overrated, and I wanted to discuss the differences between some of these overrated and underrated rivalries throughout League of Legends as it currently stands. And I think CLG versus TSM is overrated, and I think that's easily seen given CLG's loss streak, right? CLG hadn't beaten TSM for like 1100 days or some shit, and they finally beat them, of course, but it just goes to show how one-sided this rivalry actually was. And it was in a really poor state, right? TSM just kept on winning over and over. And fans have recognized this. Fans have seen that, it's not the same CLG as of old, the best org in the entire North American region for a little while. And then TSM just kind of took over, right? And, just because something is old doesn't mean it's necessarily good, right? Just because they have history with each other doesn't mean it's a rivalry, right? There has to be some sort of closeness in between those two different skill levels, right? And it's obvious that TSM have been far and above CLG for a very long time. So it just becomes not entertaining when then this rivalry is forced upon the crowd over and over again, right? It's one thing to play into a rivalry because there is some truth behind it, but it's another thing to press a old rivalry or an old agenda just because it's historical. That it just doesn't really vibe well, especially within the esports space or sports space, and that the organization, they've changed out a ton of fucking people. So at the end of the day, it's not really that big of a rivalry anymore because so many players have changed, and it just doesn't have the same history in that context itself. Now, as for player rivalries, I think the Bjergsen versus Jensen rivalry is completely underrated. I mean, the broadcast barely ever highlights this, and yet they're both still top tier mid laners, top 3 at worst ever, in their entirety within the league. So it's strange to see that this rivalry isn't hyped more and more by the fans and also by the broadcast itself. You could play into this that these guys have been going toe to toe together. They've been some of the most mechanically gifted mid laners in North America currently. And I'm just disappointed that also the players themselves don't play into creating this rivalry, right? I'm not saying to artificially create a rivalry or narrative. And in fact, I'm actually saying that the players which do have strong feelings of beating another player to then be able to express it, because you have to imagine that behind the scenes, these players have to get a little heated, getting consistently beat by someone or respecting a player for their skill, but also very close in skill, right? So I imagine that both Bjergsen and Jensen do have this sort of inner feelings for this rivalry that certainly does exist to an extent, but it's not necessarily expressed. And so I'd like to see that come into fruition because it would create another offshoot storyline that's really great and that shows these two competitors kind of going head to head. And I know it might not be in the same personality vein that Bjergsen has, which he has a focus on himself, but it would still be really fucking cool to see. And I think it's a very underrated rivalry in and of itself. Now, to go over to Europe and the LEC, I think Fnatic versus G2 is a prime example of a great rivalry. And I think it's properly rated, actually, because, I mean, they both now have a substantial legacy of winning most of the time and are on a relatively equal footing. So it's cool to see both of them kind of banter and go for the top winning spot of, winning the entire LEC. G2, of course, with their famous taking the Fnatic mid laner Caps, right? Like, that's a big storyline in itself, and it kind of fuels the rivalry. And then G2 are the newer org, right? Usurping Fnatic, and they're considered the best in Europe. So this is just a properly fun rivalry, and it is played into a good and healthy amount from both the broadcast and the players and the owners too. So I think this rivalry is kind of an example of how something should play out, both historically, if given the chance, both because of relative skill level, and also played up by some of their players and some of the history that aligns both of the teams and organizations together. I think it's really sick. Now, rivalries also don't have to exist at the highest level, right? Generally, someone's going to look up to someone far ahead of them, or someone they think is just a better player than themselves. But it doesn't mean you have to have a current rivalry that matches your level, right? You think of some rivalries that could exist and would be kind of cool, right? Because, like, I think of first thing that comes to mind for me is Cody Sun and Stixxay, right? Both play somewhat of a similar style in that they both try and just wait for the late game and then end up hard carrying. Now, they also have a dissimilar style to where Stixxay is a little bit more aggressive, which is cool, but they're at a similar level, and that's what makes it really great. And they've also both played with the same support, so they have this leveling ground of, okay, these two ADCs were kind of taught by Aframu of itself, right? And of course, Cody Sun first played with Olay, but I think he actually mostly got his footing from Aframu himself. And then you go on from that, and now you have these two ADCs who are on different teams with different supports, and they've kind of started at a similar time too. So it becomes this great question of who is going to be the greatest North American ADC to rival the current one, which is Doublelift, right? And so I think this would just be kind of a cool rivalry to play into, and just the magic of seeing these stars rise to even greater heights, and to see who's actually going to make it out. Is it Stixxay or is it Cody Sun that is going to be able to match up with the end boss, which is Doublelift, right? And then once it progresses to there, then it could maybe go into like, hey, now that I'm pretty much undisputed number 2, I'm going for that top spot for Doublelift, right? So I think that would just be kind of cool to see and play into when it comes to both broadcast narratives, media narratives, and player narratives too. Another fun rivalry I think would be great would be Dardoch versus Meteos, right? And also Xmithy. I mean, you have all of these junglers. They're all NA. One viewed as highly skilled and aggressive. Another being, this NA legend, but he's also on the older side, so maybe his mechanics aren't up to snuff, but he happens to be one of the smarter junglers within the entire league. And then you have this other NA legend who is just thought of as, you know, this guy that is very cerebral and knows how to play around his team's strengths and weaknesses, and is just really good at playing the game, and also is the KDA king, right? So all of these could mix together to see, you know, who is the best North American jungler of all time. Is it Xmithie? Is it Dardoch? Is it Meteos? All of these junglers have something on the line, and when looking at them statistically and when they go against each other, you can even look at Dardoch versus Xmithie, right? Dardoch replacing Xmithie over on Immortals, I think it was. And so you had that entire lineup. Maybe it was the other way around, not remembering it correctly. But you have that. You have Dardoch versus Meteos, which is like two of the bad boys in North America. But one is, you could see reflect in the other one, in that Meteos is the older one who maybe matured at a faster rate and a better rate, but still he shows that fieriness, you know, whenever he talks to the media, or maybe he gets on the mic or whatnot in LCS interviews. And then you have Dardoch, who is this troubled youth that has been trying to work his way through all these different teams, and maybe could be like this alternate universe of what Meteos would have been or could have been. So I just think there's a lot of player rivalries that could be played into by everyone within the League of Legends space, and also the fans as well too. And now, I'm not saying that rivalries don't have to be about trash talk or sabotage, right? They don't have to go in that angle. They don't have to be just straight disrespect. You don't need to put someone down in order to elevate yourself, but you could still have a person you view as competition, right? There's still someone that maybe you might respect enough in order to realize that they are your competition, right? They're someone that you respect just enough to where you actually want to beat them almost no matter what. So generally, I just think in the grand scheme of things, the balance of underrated and overrated rivalries needs to be considered by the community and the broadcast. And there needs to be just more high quality rivalries in the scene as it is. And also, since EU and NA have a great advantage due to having a shared language and close social structures and norms, having more specific rivalries instead of just EU versus NA would kind of elevate the scene of the entire Western League of Legends and create significantly more storylines for people to follow during international tournaments. That really isn't focused enough. And yeah, you could say number one North American team versus number one European team, but generally, well, I see that loosely now, but because it hasn't been the case recently, but generally they are different teams every time. So it's not more so that it's the number one team. It should just be, you know, does Team Liquid have a beef with G2, and how do they have a beef together? Maybe you could elevate the storylines between that of Jensen betraying, you know, his fucking homeland or some shit. I don't know. This shit would just write itself, basically. Especially given how we steal so many European imports anyway. So the shit just writes itself, to be honest. So it just seems like all these different rivalries are not being explored. And I would hope that the broadcast emphasizes this. The players actually start thinking about it, because rivalries are actually quite good. And sure, you might get a little bit burned when it comes to social media and say you don't live up to whatever you set out for expectations. But at the end of the day, that's what it is with being a pro player anyways, is that you set these expectations, and if you fail to meet them, people are going to roast you. So what? It's all entertainment at the end of the day. And I think that is what a lot of players and the broadcast and the media often forget, is that it's all about fucking entertainment at the end of the day. That's why we're watching this, because in the grand scheme of shit, esports and sports don't really fucking matter, right? They're just entertainment and they're for enjoyment. So play into that a little bit, give a little bit more entertainment, and make these things a little bit more exciting when it comes to rivalries within North America and Europe as well too.